the first thing I'd like to do is to turn to a trailer for the film Storm Lake, and then we'll come back and talk to the filmmaker.
In a small northwest Iowa town, the Storm Lake Times weaves the fabric of the community in large ways and small.
Yeah. Right.
We're on deadline. We're ready to put it on the page.
I get real uptight about deadlines.
Readers decide our future, not any branch of government.
We have happy stories about all types of people.
You're a singing star.
Most people in Storm Lake care about community.
Hey, guys!
But how long does a community support journalism?
Because now people want to get their news for free, and people are saying, oh, well, that's not worth $1. And that's not how you sustain a democracy. We've always operated at the break-even point.
$7.
Mom and pop stores that were the basis of our advertising are gone.
How else do you make a small community survive?
All the meatpacking plants are infected with COVID.
No one's even talking about testing at this point.
How sickening it is forcing immigrant workers into a deadly workplace. And to me, there are blatant forms of racism and there are subtler forms of racism, but it's racism all the same.
We were the first ones to say a number of Tyson employees tested positive. And then there was this dramatic spike and it was unbelievable. We're continuing to report on the numbers as best we can.
Now, Storm Lake is the hottest spot in the country. It's been a pretty stressful time, and we're losing money, and there ain't a thing you can do about it. Our ads fell off a cliff. It doesn't make a lot of sense to go borrow money when we could just walk away from it now.
You can change the world through journalism. The reporter is the cornerstone in a functioning democracy. And without strong local journalism, the fabric of the place becomes frayed.
The prospect of the newspaper not being around terrifies me.
So if we do the right things here, we'll be all right.
So let's get that story.
Got on mute there, of course. So that's just a taste of what a touching and powerful film Storm Lake is. And we're very fortunate to have one of the directors of the film, Beth Levison, with us today. Beth, I wonder if you could turn your mic on and join us in the discussion to help us understand. This film happens in a real crucible of America, of a moment in time when the elections are happening, when the pandemic breaks out. You arrive on the scene to report this story that is so important in the life of our democracy. What brought you to this story in that place at this moment? Tell us what you were trying to accomplish with this film.
Yeah, well, thanks, Vince and Roshni, for having me, and Alice and all of us here. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's a funny story in some ways, because when we started making this film, we really just wanted to make a movie. You know, we weren't on a mission of any kind. We just thought that Art seemed like a really fascinating person. And as soon as we got to Storm Lake, it seemed like a pretty fascinating place. And we felt like, okay, maybe there could be a movie here. You know, just as a little bit of backstory, we started developing the film in late 2018 and were able to secure some early support. I am one half of the directing duo. My directing partner is Jerry Rishus, who's actually an Iowan who grew up on a hog farm about an hour and a half north of Storm Lake. He's the one who stumbled onto the story once he read that Art won the Pulitzer in 2017. But we teamed up. We're in development in late 2018. We're able to raise some initial funds, and we started shooting in early 2019 when Storm Lake was the locus of the first multi-candidate event for the Democratic presidential candidates. It was the very start of the election cycle. Art was moderating the conversation. We thought maybe we could start filming then, and that maybe we could continue to film through the presidential election of 2020. So basically we had no idea, what we would encounter. We knew we were shooting the Heartland Forum. We had a plan to shoot the 4th of July parade, which is a really rich scene in the film. We had a feeling that presidential candidates might come to town, and they did, like Pete Buttigieg. And we knew that we wanted to shoot the Iowa caucuses. We could have never have imagined that the Iowa caucuses would have turned out to be the debacle that they kind of came to be. And then, of course, COVID was completely unexpected. So, we knew we had a movie, like the more that the filming continued. One thing that I think about a lot, especially being on this call, is that in the early stages of filming, Art kept on saying that a community is only as strong as its newspaper, and a newspaper is only as strong as its community. And when in the early stages of filming, we were like, yeah, because we didn't know. And then I think as we continued to film and we saw the impact of this newspaper on its community, its reportage of COVID. I mean, Storm Lake was a hot spot because it's a meatpacking center in America. As everything started and continued to unfold, I think we really saw that for ourselves. And so a really interesting thing in terms of the evolution of the film is at first it started out as a film about art. Then we realized it's not just a film about art, it's about a family and a newspaper. And then we really started to understand it's about a community as well. Mm-hmm. And so there really was an evolution. And, we've continued to now take the film across the country, and conversations that we continue to have wherever we go is this role that a local newspaper has in kind of holding the fabric of a community together. What's so interesting is it's a light bulb moment oftentimes for people in the audience to hear this idea. So, what started out as a movie has become a bit of a mission now to screen the film as widely as possible and to help audiences understand this relationship between a newspaper and the community, especially at this moment when so many newspapers across the country and local ones are facing an existential crisis.
Yeah. And you're sharing this movie now with other communities, with other bringing people together to see the film and see how it's relevant to their experience. Just as we were getting ready for this discussion, on the side lead-up conversation we had, you were just visiting in a small community in Vermont. Do you want to just say a few words about your experience there? Because I think this is an illustration of how you're using the film and how it can actually serve our purposes too.
Yeah. I'm still processing the whole thing. So we had been the opening night film of a film festival called the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival. I have a long relationship with the programmers of that film festival. And in August, they invited me to do a 4-day, 5-city tour of the film across the state of Vermont, that we would have community screenings everywhere we go with a Q&A. I was always part of the Q&A, and then we would have an editor with a local newspaper there as well. The goal is always to facilitate conversation between the newspaper and its readership, or people in the audience who might not be readers. So anyway, we screened the film on Saturday in Woodstock, Vermont. The Vermont Standard is the paper there. It is the oldest, longest running newspaper in Vermont. And Phil Camp, who is the editor, launches into the Q&A saying, I took so many notes. I watched the film 3 times. I took notes because the Cullens have really figured out how to keep their newspaper going, and we haven't. And he said, the film says that 1 in 4 newspapers have died in the past 15 years. And I don't know how else to say this, but we're dying. And I don't want to beg for money, but if we don't start getting some money into the newspaper, we're going to be gone. And so anyway, just before this call, Alice and I had a call with Phil to help brainstorm ways that he could communicate with his community. Basically, during the Q&A, at a certain point, as soon as he said that, I basically said, look, if you don't ask me a single question and this becomes an opportunity for the community and the newspaper to engage in conversation to secure its future, I'm completely down with that. And it really did become a town hall with people in the audience saying, I want to meet you for coffee. We want to give you money, or you have to put this on the front page. You have to tell us. So anyway, it was the first time, to be honest, that we've had a community screening where the newspaper actually said, no, we're dying. So really, it was really interesting.
That's great. And of course, you're going to help, but you can't help everyone everywhere. You're a filmmaker. And so fortunately, you have a partner in this work, Alice Quinlan, and we're going to turn to Alice because she's helping to lead the outreach and impact work of community screenings and such. So Alice, maybe you can tell us a little bit what the plan is so that this is not a life sentence for Beth Levison to continue to save each individual paper one by one.
Thank you so much, Vince. I think I'm going to steal that for my tagline when I try to describe what I do is release filmmakers from their mission and give it to organizations and people who can take it and run with it.
She's got to go direct her next film.
Yeah, exactly. And we want her to. I think, what I want to share just first of all, to build on what Beth was sharing about the experience that she had in Vermont, which also is a fantastic, just testimonial to the fortitude of independent filmmakers in general, which I'll just say, is that, Phil, the publisher and editor of the Vermont Standard, had in his, he had shared that he had communicated, the status of the paper in the way that he had available to him, which was communicating through the paper. And I think what we saw with that event, with the screening, and this is what I believe that documentary film can do when we, work hard with partners to make sure that the strategy is accurate, is create those community moments where it's like, oh, okay, I didn't really get it until we were looking at it from 20,000 feet. I see what's happening on screen with Storm Lake, and immediately, I think, luckily enough for me and for all the work that we're doing, the film is incredibly powerful and inspiring, and also translates quite well. It's not just a story about a small town, rural town in Iowa. It is a story that is happening everywhere. I live in Chicago. It's my story. It's a story if you're in a mid-sized city, if you're in a rural city, if you're living in, a suburban area. And we saw that in every Q&A. That was really the strategy. And just to take a step back and, talk bigger picture, my job as an impact producer is really to figure out, what's going on with the issue, who are the experts, who can we talk to make sure that as we're rolling out the film and going to these festivals and it's having this release, what can we do that's actually going to be like incisive and giving folks things that are really going to make a difference. And luckily enough for me, there is already an amazing advisor on the film, Penny Muse Abernathy, who's really the leading expert in global news deserts.
A lot of us know her.
Exactly. Just reading through her work was obviously core to what we were doing. And one stat in particular, I think really, shook us to our core, which is that 71% of Americans don't know that local news, or they think that local news outlets are doing well financially. This is from the Pew Research Center. And then 84% don't pay for local news. And this is just a golden impact nugget, right, in terms of strategy, because it's something that is not known. And when people do know it, they get really upset and they want to do something.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
incredible.
Great.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit more about what the campaign strategy is? You have, you've already done a lot of screenings, a lot of community screenings, even with Delta and Omicron rising. You've been able to have a lot of screenings. and you have plans for more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we were blown away with personally and collectively is just, and we, you see this, the innovation and, ingenuity and solutions oriented mindset of the fight to save local news is incredible. So we are just, hanging on to the bumper of these amazing partner organizations that are at the forefront of this work. So as Beth mentioned, really the strategy was everywhere we went, there was a local newspaper connection, and we were making sure that it was very easy for folks to get connected to their local newspaper and learn more. And then also working with folks like PEN America to do that educational aspect about talking about, what is the threat? And then how is it connecting to, democracy, obviously incredibly timely throughout, the entire length of the campaign. And then also digging deeper. Now we're looking into, media literacy and connecting with folks in classrooms. So, in addition to doing that, like newspaper to newspaper connection, now we have the opportunity to dig deeper and make sure that students in classrooms, we're working with the News Literacy Project, are going to know that, you need to diversify your news sources, and this is how you do it. And also you can pay a, subscription, get that subscription, donate. So for us, it was really about making sure that because, the goal was really just raising awareness. When people knew, they got really upset, and we saw that power in the room. Even, every room we were in, Doc NYC, a really amazing audience in New York, they were shocked and wanted to immediately know, who can I subscribe to? How do I, I know the New York Times isn't doing local news in New York as much as I want them to. And then we were able to make that connection through these national news associations that we were partnering with to be able to make that connection, like the Institute for Nonprofit News. Yeah, doing amazing.
So, I mean, I think it's a problem that it's easy to see how the average news consumer, the average, citizen can take it for granted, that it's a resource, that it has always been there. Somebody must pay for it. I don't know who, but actually now we need to think about that. So this is interesting, I think, for us, and it appeals to the team here at MIF in particular, because it's not just another powerful film about something. We care about all the topics, but actually it's really honing in on a key issue for us, which is the urgency of supporting local news, central to our mission and to our members' missions, et cetera. So we have a special, I think, affinity for what you're trying to do with your film. It's different from every other Clips and Conversation we have about a film, as important as it may be. And so I think it's useful, particularly for community foundations, and we're going to hear a little bit more from Courtney a little bit later in this discussion. But if we're thinking about how can I use this film in my work as a funder in a local community, and especially as a community foundation who, where I might want to convene my donors around this topic, can you say just a word about how you can work with funders to go into communities to help, do something in particular?
Absolutely. I think one of the other things that you're discussing here is that along the way, we, as an impact producer, obviously you can sit in a room and talk to people and think about, what strategy is going to hit prior to the actual rollout of a campaign. But what was amazing is that along the way, we heard everywhere that we're going, this is an incredible tool, a philanthropy tool. This is an incredible tool to use as basically a resource in your communications toolkit to talk about, really communicating why a healthy local news ecosystem equals a healthy community, as Art was saying. And so we're working with the Lenfest Institute to actually develop a toolkit about this, about, putting the film to work and putting it in the hands of community philanthropy to really make a case. And also it's, it's a beautiful show and tell, but really putting the film to work.
Super. And we're going to open this up to discussion and questions for anybody who's participating today, but we'll talk more about this. I will just acknowledge that normally when we convene discussions about particular work or organizations, it's not a pitch session. for that work. But I will acknowledge that, as you've continued to work on this, the work has only grown, and it's work that we care about and share the purpose of. So I would just say that as you've grown this piece of work, there's still room and opportunity for people to support the expansion of this area of your work. And so if anybody wants to learn more, they can ping us separately and be in touch with Beth and Alice. Do you want to get in on this, Beth?
I just want to add one quick thing, because I think it's important to add material sort of success stories too, because we know that we're raising awareness and that we are facilitating these conversations. But also in Vermont, my last screening was in Randolph, Vermont. There's a newspaper there called The Herald that supports 16 towns in Orange County there, I think it's called. And so again, screened the film, had a Q&A, and the newspaper has a young editor, guy in maybe his 30s, who bought the paper. And, we were talking about, are there parallels between the experience of the Cullens and your experience running this newspaper? And he said, yeah, but we're doing pretty okay. We got a PPP loan and are doing pretty okay as a result of that. And I said, so no challenges. And he said, well, the one challenge that we have is that we do represent 16 towns through the newspaper. And he said, and they all have their city council meetings at the same time, or many of them do. So we've had this issue that we don't have enough reporters to cover the city council meetings. So he said, so I developed this system where we have local stringers who go to the community city council meetings and report back. And that way we're able to basically cover every city council meeting. He said, the problem is though, in the last couple of weeks, our Randolph volunteer retired. So we are short a reporter. And like 5 seconds later, a young woman shot her hand up into the air and said, I'm your new stringer. I just moved back to Randolph. I was living in Brooklyn. I want to be a part of the community. I want to be a part of the paper. And as I was leaving the screening, the two of them were talking about, okay, how it could work and let's meet next week. So that was really, amazing to see that the film could do that too, that it could inspire someone to engage in that kind of way. So
that's great. That's a great story. And we'll have to circle back to Randolph a year from now and see how the newcomer from Brooklyn is doing as a reporter for all the Vermont people. But anyway, God bless. The film has been out. It was on PBS already. And if you haven't seen the film, you can watch it currently on Amazon. If you're fortunate enough to have Amazon Plus, you can just go ahead and do that, and you can rent it for $3 or whatever if you don't have Amazon Plus. But also it has the, I think, unusual distinction of coming back for another screening on PBS in April. So whoever's watching now or whenever, you can see the film there. But I think it's, for our discussion, it'd be nice to see a little bit more, a clip from the film, to get a feeling for who's running this little paper in Storm Lake, Iowa. Roshni will tee up another clip for us to share, and then we'll turn to our other participants to hear their perspective on it.
Dear Tom, when James Madison wrote the First Amendment to the Constitution, he had you in mind. The reporter is the cornerstone of an informed electorate and a functioning democracy.
So is it one per house then?
Yeah.
One of each per house.
Yeah.
The best journalism is that which builds communities. You build your community by publicizing good deeds done,
Hey guys.
by urging yourself and those around you to do better,
What? How are you? Doing good?
and by making certain that your town's issues are heard in Des Moines and Washington. Tyranny prevails whenever the press is not free. Stand guard.
Buenos días, estudiantes. ¿Dónde encuentras la letra A?
Where are you from originally?
I was actually born in Mexico, in Jalisco.
Oh.
And then my mother and my two brothers, we settled in Storm Lake, Iowa. I was one of the first kids when the ESL program was getting started.
Reporters hold about as much regard as the world's oldest profession, but we are not professionals. Nobody gives us license, we draw it from the Constitution.
Did you get some complaints from parents about still having the football game even after positive tests?
I did not.
All we have is our own credibility, which is called into question twice a week in our circumstance.
So how's business? Is it picking up any?
Question for you too.
Yeah?
Yes, question for you too. I am scared what's going to come for us as a newspaper after elections.
Yeah, I don't know either.
We have to do every single thing for the true journalists don't die.
Right on, sister.
There you go, man.
Si se puede. Readers decide our future, not any branch of government.
Do you have your press pass?
Yes, I do.
Make sure that you have that displayed, okay?
Okay, will do.
If you find writing is a chore after a while, you're in the wrong business. The pay is lousy and the hours can be terrible. But you can change the world through journalism. That's the only good reason to get into this trade. Because when you're looking for a friend, remember that the dog can't read. Love, you'd better check that out. Dad. P.S. Is that story done yet?
Another great clip. And so when we have these discussions, I think it's also important not only to hear from the filmmaker and to funders who need to work with these projects and ideas, but also from the practitioners who are actually doing the work that we're exploring in the subject matter. And we're very fortunate to have with us today Catherine Kelly, who's managing editor and director of Bridge Detroit. And she's familiar with the film, but also familiar with the work as well. What we saw there in that last clip was not just a community institution, but a small business, and in fact, a family business. Art Cullen is talking as a dad, and you see the young reporter there as his son. And I think you see his wife there too, and you learn in this film that it's really a family business, and it might be hard to do if it weren't a family business. But Catherine, in addition to her current work in Bridge Detroit, we learned also grew up in a family business household of a newspaper family. So she brings to us both of those experiences. And I just want to invite you, Catherine, to share your reaction to the film and to our discussion today and bring your perspective to this discussion.
I loved the film and I found it extremely moving. I shared it with my mom because, I mean, the experience was so familiar. My parents started their newspaper on our dining room table in 1978, and I get emotional now.
Yeah.
And I remember being a little kid and my mom and my sister saying, "Hey, Mom, Dad, it's raining on your business," because that's how much a part of your life the paper becomes. For years, Wednesday being deadline day was the organizing principle of our life. And you really can't operate these kind of businesses without that kind of passion and without that heart, because you are accountable to the community and you're so ingrained. Sorry about that. And you're such a part of the community that you're present, you're at the meetings, people know your parents, they know you, you know the issues. If you didn't get it right, people come and talk to you about it. If you did get it right, people remember you forever. You know, people still come up to me and tell me about stories that the family business covered. And
so what was that publication, by the way?
It's called The Michigan Citizen.
And it reached countywide, or?
Well, the paper started in Benton Harbor. Benton Harbor and St. Joe, we call them the Twin Cities. And Benton Harbor was mostly Black and poor, and St. Joseph was white and a lot more affluent. It was an African-American newspaper, and actually my dad also, he was a serial entrepreneur, he had a bar. And the money from the bar business started the newspaper. And
oh, wow.
When they knew they needed to expand and they were at a point that they could expand, they had to go to a major media market. And so Detroit, that's when we expanded to Detroit in '85. Keeping the business alive was, a constant through the paper's existence. And we unfortunately had to close it in 2014, but you're constantly walking this balance of trying to tell great stories and get the stories right and be present. And, you never have enough reporters, you never have enough time, but you do it anyway. And there's also never enough money. I think the reason that the paper was able to survive so long is, we all did 4 things at least. I could write a story in a pinch. I could edit. I sold ads. We all did 4 to 6 other jobs. But it was a labor of love, and it really is a tremendous resource, because when you're really located in the community, the stories that you tell, my mom covered a story of a man who was wrongfully incarcerated, and it was one of the few non-DNA cases that the Innocence Project took up. The work that you do, because you are present and you're listening, it's rewarding. It was rewarding for us, but I think it was also rewarding for our readers.
It's really important for us to hear about the passion and the mission, but also the challenge of running that business, because I think philanthropy is learning that actually there is a role for foundation support, for for-profit news organizations in communities, and there's a special role and that the local Black press has played without the kind of philanthropic support for that reason. So thanks for illustrating that point. I guess a consolation is my understanding of the newspaper business is eventually when you're done closing the pages, you go to the bar. And since you owned the bar, that was easy. But tell us just a little bit about the Bridge Detroit too, and how this story is relevant to your current work as well.
Well, once you are in journalism, it's hard to leave. Right. So I left for a few years, but when Stephen Henderson, the project executive, got funding to do Bridge Detroit, Detroit is a majority Black city and has been really underrepresented in terms of the news. And, unlike a lot of other news outlets, we operate based on a community priorities model where we're working to measure and understand Detroiters' issues, concerns, and priorities. So, and that helps shape the direction of our coverage. I'm sorry, Vince, what did you ask me?
Well, just in terms of like, if there's something about what we've learned from the film, if that helps you make your case, do you have to make your case for support for Bridge? I think you get foundation support, major donor support.
We do, and we're supported for 5 years. We launched almost 2.5 years ago, but we're really trying to think through, how do we sustain ourselves? And what is like the right mix? Also, in terms of serving Detroit, Detroit is a poor big city. So,
right. And you were able to launch with significant coalition of foundation support Is that right? Who were the supporters? Do you know off the top?
Knight Foundation, Ford Foundation, Skillman. Those were the kind of big ones, and Kresge, yes.
Right. Well, that's a great, an unusual experience to get that kind of significant support from a coalition like that. So that's great. This is great to have your current and your family history as part of this discussion. I think it helps to us to get a feel for the meaning of this film for practitioners too. So I want to turn to Courtney Bengtson, who's with the Wichita Community Foundation in just a moment. But I want us to take another look at another clip before we do that. And I think that in addition to this being a story about a family business, it's also a story about a community. And I think it's important, particularly for those of us who operate maybe on the coast or whatever, to get a better sense of what a community like Storm Lake, Iowa is, and how, like breaking through some of the stereotypes. And I think this next clip is going to help us get a feel for the place in that regard.
So then Julio Barroso was featured back in 1996 as being a kid who helped other kids learn English. And then there was a raid of the meatpacking plant. And then in a following issue, it was reported that Julio is gone. 8-year-old deported with parents. Since we do these feature stories, we get to know people, but they're not just like anonymous immigrants. This is a kid that we think is awesome and cute. And so then the next day when we find out that they were kicked out of the US, we cared. And so then later we were asking, whatever happened to Julio? And that's where Tom started doing this investigating, and we actually found him in Mexico as a young adult today.
A little boy from 22 years ago was top of mind last Thursday, Julio Barroso. In 1996, the world changed for Julio, then in second grade at North School. The immigration agents swooped in on IBP, predecessor to Tyson, and rounded up scores of undocumented immigrants. Barroso's family was among them. Julio, now 30 years old, is married and the father of 3, working in Guadalajara, Mexico, for 1/10 the $18 per hour he could get in Storm Lake. A dream is foreclosed. In our lush green town of 15,000 or so, we don't know our exact population because so many are immigrants. Nestled among the row crops and hog houses of northwest Iowa, 2,200 workers cut up pigs and turkeys for Tyson. 300 others crack eggs for liquid shipment at Rembrandt Foods, 15 miles north. Hundreds more distill ethanol from corn. And those 3,000 or so, maybe half undocumented, who knows, are worrying not just about jobs, but also about their lives in Trump's America. Even those with papers will tell you they feel a little edgy. Dreamers are our vitality, our future. They want to stay here with family, unlike so many of us who push our children off to Chicago or the Twin Cities. And we all wish that Julio would come home to Storm Lake someday. We need him and miss him.
That's a great clip. I think it gives you a feel for the place and the people of Storm Lake. So we're going to turn now to Courtney Bengtson. She's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Wichita Community Foundation. And I think it's really interesting because she's leading the journalism work there. And I think that all of the journalism funders aren't the chief strategy officers of their organizations. And so I think it's interesting, and maybe Courtney could tell us about their recent investment in local news and why that is such a strategic initiative for for their foundation. And we'll get into how this last clip is especially relevant in Wichita as well. But Courtney.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks. Happy to be here and happy to speak about our recent investment in local news and information needs in Wichita. And so to your point, Vince, about the chief strategy officer being the key journalism funder, that has emerged from a, I would say, I began my career at the Wichita Eagle. I worked there for a few years in college and right after college. And so have a personal affinity for journalism myself, but I would say that is not, it's not absolutely necessary for foundations to have a journalist on staff to be able to do this grant making. So I do want to preface all of what I say with that. But, you know, the Community Foundation engaged in a predictive analytics project about 5 years ago. And we were looking at how do we address some of the challenges that our community is having from an economic standpoint. So we're, you know, smack in the middle of America. We're the largest city in the state. Our MSA is around 600,000. Most of what you see around us looks just like what you saw in that last clip, very rural so in our case, we're the big city, right? But we're not that large of a city. And one of our main concerns was we have identified some really key economic challenges, yet our own citizens aren't informed around what those challenges are. And so big picture thinking, we started kind of looking at, okay, from our grant making perspective, how can we help influence and support some of these some of the solutions to some of these challenges. And for us, it was really around that information needs aspect. We have a wonderful connection with Knight Foundation. And so we are a mid-sized city for Knight Foundation. So they do have a donor advised fund here with us. So I've been privy to have the privilege to go to a lot of Knight media forums and be connected in all of that world. All that to say that we came together with the American Journalism Project right after they were announced. And I just said, how do we do this? How do we make sure that our community is more informed? And so fast forward 2.5 years, we just recently made our largest discretionary grant that we've ever made in the history of the organization to kickstart a nonprofit digital media outlet here in Wichita, the Wichita Beacon. And we've made a 3-year commitment to that. I imagine we will make much more beyond that in the future. But really it's about access to information and making sure that our community feels informed to be able to make the decisions that they need to live their everyday lives in a way that allows them to continue to grow as a person or as a family.
That's great. I have 1 or 2 questions for Courtney, but I'll just invite anybody who's listening. If you have a question for any of our speakers, you can pop it into chat or raise your hand. I'm happy to, invite you to turn on your mics and your cameras as well to join us in asking your own question, but I'll be happy to do it if you prefer. And for each of our speakers, if you have questions for each other too, you should consider yourself a part of that invitation. But so Courtney, can you maybe reflect on the kind of community that Wichita is that may be a little different from what somebody outside, in the same way that we saw the very large immigrant population of Storm Lake and how that's related to the meatpacking industry, et cetera, and other agricultural businesses. Is there anything about Wichita that will be revealed in local community news that may not be obvious to the outside viewer?
Yeah, so as we started this whole process, we did the typical needs assessment to determine what people were looking for and what we could help elevate. And, we knew this was an issue. We have several invisible communities within our city. The Hispanic community, the Black community, and the Asian communities, all 3 of those rose very high to the top. And the biggest thing that I think was for our board, especially as we were making these decisions around how to invest in local news, is since the last census, prior to the 2020 census, the Hispanic and Latino population in the Wichita area was around 7 or 8%. And we are now, with the recent 2020 census, almost 18% Hispanic and Latino populated. And so we know that there are going to be very large shifts in demographics. And part of our role and our investment with the Wichita Beacon is to help enhance storytelling and information access to those that have previously been underserved in our community.
And do you make the case, you were able to make a large discretionary grant. For those who don't know, community foundations have endowments for which professional staff are able to make direct philanthropic grants, but they also serve as advisors and collectors of funds from donors in the community. And so donor advised funds also flow through community foundations, and those can be two different sources of support for local news or any other thing. So do you also make the case for local news to your donor advisors through the community foundation? And
we do.
How does that work?
I would say that just in the last year or so, we've really started actively pursuing that. Previously, it was just sort of the community foundation model that donor advised funds and discretionary funds kind of had a divide between the two of them. And we've worked really diligently with identifying specific donors who are interested in that. We just about a month ago had one of our donor advised fund holders give a significant gift into our discretionary funds for news and information.
Awesome.
So that's wonderful. We're starting to see that. It's been slow going, but I think that the longer that we have these types of discussions and the more often that we bring them up, like with Storm Lake, I'm talking to our donor services department about how can we show this to our donors and make sure that they understand at a national level why we are talking about local news here, and be able to make it relevant to our community, because we can find similarities between Storm Lake and Wichita that people may not realize.
All right. Well, I'll just issue a warning here. I see that two of the board members of Media Impact Funders are on this call, Jennifer Preston and Doug Root, and I think both of them might have something to offer with regard to this discussion and how we can use this film to make the case in local communities as well. But thank you, Courtney, for that. I'll also just say that we've actually done reports recently about giving through community foundations to journalism and media in local communities. And we can post a link to those reports as well, because I think what you see is there's actually a lot of activity, media grants from community foundations, and we're only able to infer from the data that we can see, but it looks like a lot of that money is coming from donor advised funds. And so this point that you're making, the connection between the program staff, the community foundation staff, and their donors in the local communities can probably be a very promising, dialogue for these purposes. But Jennifer and or Doug, do you want to turn on your mics and offer any perspective on our conversation today?
I want to hear from Jennifer.
I just want to say that from the moment I saw the film Storm Lake, it just resonated in such a powerful way, because as Courtney noted, it's so important to make the story of journalism relevant. And while the story of Storm Lake is set in a small town in Iowa, it's relevant to communities big and small. And I just applaud the Media Impact Funders team for hosting this event. One of the things that we just like heard for years at Knight Foundation is how challenging it can be. And Courtney, you get the award for persistence. You were right there, early days, trying to figure it out. And wow, you really have just done a fantastic job. But one of the things that we heard is that there are not enough assets for community foundation leaders to tell the story in their about why journalism is important for democracy. And gosh, Art Cullen does such a great job in that letter to his son, and just the way that Jerry and Beth filmed even that clip is just so powerful. So with such a great asset is a great opportunity for place-based funders and community foundation leaders to use this film to just help connect journalism in communities. So thank you, everyone, for all of the really great hard work. And Catherine, oh my God, I'm glad I was on mute when you were telling the story of your oh my goodness, about the Michigan Citizen and Steve and everyone, Katie Locker, everyone's so lucky, and John, to have you at the helm at Bridge Detroit.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Jennifer. You're definitely a #1 fan of the film, and appreciate your enthusiasm for it as well. Doug, do you have anything to offer in terms of like the ability of community foundations to use this, and do you see that as a tactic that will be useful going forward?
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have been able to get in on this program, and I'm just adding to Jennifer's gratefulness for Media Impact Funders putting this together. And I wish I could have 15 of my both private, independent, and community foundation colleagues around our region in on this. We are a pretty tight-knit group, and there's a lot of commitment to supporting local journalism. But it's the kind of, and Beth and Alice, for your work connected to this film, thank you so much. Having a project like that is so important. The question for community foundation people is, given the kind of concierge treatment that we give to our specific audiences, this is so ready and waiting, as you've described, ready and waiting for a public audience to get involved, a community building exercise, which is really what community foundations need to be doing much more about. And I would just have to throw out a question to Courtney. Clearly, you made the decision to provide a service that goes a little counter to where community foundations that I know of, and I can speak specifically to Pittsburgh, have been in terms of support for local journalism, which is niche presentations, investigative, alternative. We've done a lot of work with alternative news outlets. They go to very specific audiences, but what you're trying to do, I take, is a broad general menu. It's really what's described in Storm Lake. It's a news outlet for the entire community, and there's something in it for everyone. And that is, I think, where we need to be refocusing our efforts as community foundations. That's the thing we can grab onto, because that's what we're supposed to be about in terms of our structure and what we appeal to. And you can disagree with the way a news piece is presented. You can disagree with an editorial, but you ought to be able to find something in there that speaks the truth to information that you're trying to get. And that would be the goal that we're shooting for. Our big problem is we need to get more of the community invested. And then just one more thing I need to say to Catherine. I loved your story, and I totally agree with you about former being a former journalist is a tough thing to carry around with you. You never leave it, you never lose it. And the island of lost journalists are foundation communication staffs. So if you ever want any
no question,
any place to go park and feel good again, you can come to any community foundation or pretty much any private independent foundation, and you'll find plenty of people to give you a shoulder.
Definitely. Show of hands.
Thank you.
Right. I also just want to acknowledge that Rusty Coates has been listening in. I see your thank you for turning your camera on. You don't have to, people don't have to turn their cameras on, but it's always nice to see who's listening. And Rusty, I just wonder if you have any thoughts. Rusty is Executive Director of Journalism Funding Partners, relatively recently taking over there. Any quick thoughts on what you've heard today?
Well, I've been giving private shout outs to Beth and Alice because my board co-chair, Sheila Solomon, led the discussion at the Gene Siskel Film Center after a showing of Storm Lake. And she still raves about it. I told Beth that she's always in my chat window, and she's been lighting me up on this. What I've found is in the 6 months I've been at Journalism Funding Partners, so we connect funders with local newsrooms, for-profit, nonprofit, any stripe there are, because to me, I don't care about what your business model is. If you're a newsroom, I can't fault you for what you're doing because you're doing God's work. And I've learned that the more people become aware of this, the more they want to help. I was recently at the Georgia Grantmakers Association annual meeting, and it was singularly about the importance of funding into local news. And to me, one of the big takeaways of that was that we like to talk about local news. We talk about journalism, and we forget sometimes that news is a 4-letter word for some people, but clean air and clean water are not. Educated children are not 4-letter words. Covering climate is not a 4-letter word unless you're a wackadoo. But if we can just talk about the public good that we are doing, and that we can do, we find a better path to sustainability, especially when we embrace funding. We also find that the things that funders want to fund are things that never sold a newspaper ever. Those areas I talked about: climate, education, sustainable healthcare. None of those sold a newspaper. In fact, my series on homelessness years ago in the Central Valley had advertisers quit advertising for it. But that's the important work that needs to get highlighted. And as Alberto and Barkowin said at that Grantmakers Association meeting, market changes are opportunities for funders. They absolutely are opportunities for funders. And the more we talk in those terms, the more robust that conversation can be.
That's a great point. Well, thank you for that. And it reminds me, there is as we have found, like, it can be hard to make the case for news. And we could talk till we're blue in the face when we're just telling people they ought to do it. But one of the great axioms of journalism is show, don't tell. And with a documentary film, you show people the value of the local journalism. You're not telling them they ought to care about it. You're making them care about it because the stories are moving, they are personal. And I think it's we feel the same passion and emotion that Catherine was experiencing in telling her story anytime you watch this film. So thank you all for sharing this discussion with us. Really appreciate it. And we'll post everything in the future. Rusty, all of your private comments, we'll be able to see them as just a little Zoom warning, people. The people who record the session see all the private comments too. So, but anyway, great to see you all. Thank you all to our speakers and participants today, and we'll stay in touch and stay in tune.
Thank you for putting this together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for putting it together.
Everyone.